right, y'all, we're back. Part 2 of me ranking every single book that I read this year. I'm rating every book on a 5-star scale, and I'm also ranking them from worst to best. Part 1, I started from the bottom and worked our way up. So this is gonna be the best books that I read this year. I read 65 books total, so we've got like 33 left to rank. So stay tuned till the end for my top books of 2024. There were only 8 books that I gave 5 stars, so stay tuned to see what those are, and leave your book recommendations in the comments because I'm building my 2025 reading list right now, and you guys always have the best suggestions. Also, I read a little bit of everything, so we're gonna cover a lot of different types of books, a lot of different topics, some fiction, some nonfiction, and all my ratings are completely subjective, purely based on my reading experience. So I was gonna say I'm sorry if I hate a book that you love, but this is the positive video. This is the best books that I read, so no apologies here. Okay, jumping right in, we have Happy Place by Emily Henry. I give this 4 stars. This is a romance book that is very, very popular on Book Talk, and this was the first Emily Henry book that I read. It's a summer romance, but also the book is really invested in like the wider friend group and the setting of the book, so it's not just like these 2 characters up against the world, which I feel like made it feel more realistic, more lived in. It's also such like a light and easy read, but it never got like too pretentious. Like I've found with a lot of romance books, they can get kind of lofty, cough cough Colleen Hoover. It didn't take itself too seriously and just had excellent banter, very grounded characters. I definitely enjoyed this book. Another summer romance book, also 4 stars, we have Every Summer After. Kenzie recommended this to me and I loved it. I flew through it. I read this book in 1 sitting. It kind of reminded me of like the Sarah Dessen books that I just gobbled up as a teenager, but you know, more grown up. There were some spicy scenes. I just really liked it. It was cute. Definitely worth picking up if you just want a little like kick your feet summer romance book. Next up, we have Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption. Shawshank is one of my favorite movies of all time, and I never read the book that it was based on. This is a short novella by Stephen King. It's about a prison, and I don't really feel like this is a spoiler. I'm trying not to give spoilers on any of these, but I mean, come on, it's Shawshank Redemption. It's about a man who escapes. This was a quick read. It's a great story that takes place over the course of 30 years, and just nothing beats the ending. It's so good. It's one of my favorite movies, like I said. The book doesn't quite wow like the book. This book is from the perspective of the character Red, who's played by Morgan Freeman in the movie, so I was just picturing Morgan Freeman the whole time I was reading this book versus the audiobook. I just fully read this book and I heard Morgan Freeman's voice in my head the entire time, which added to the experience. It was wonderful. Did I say 4 stars? 4 stars. Also 4 stars, we have The Wish. This is a book that really makes you feel. It's by Nicholas Sparks, and I hadn't read one of his books since I was like in high school, but this book, it really made me want to pick up more of his novels because it was just really sweet and cozy. It's set during the holidays, and I read it like right around that time, so it just really like the vibes hit for me. It was very cozy and definitely a fun book to pick up at the end of the year. I guess I didn't really say what this book is about. It's about a woman with a terminal diagnosis and her recounting the one time in her life that she truly felt like she was in love. And through that, she finds some closure. There was a big reveal at the end of this book that felt incredibly obvious to me, but I still really enjoyed it. It did drag a little bit in the middle, so a solid 4-star book. Next, we have another romance, The 7-Year Slip. 4 stars. This is a romance book with time travel elements. There's some mild spice, but really it was more so just like being so invested in the romance and their tension, and there were a couple reveals that had me absolutely giddy. And what I really liked about this book is while it was mostly lighthearted and just a cute romance, it also did tie in some deeper elements of grief and depression, and I have recommended this book to many friends and I will continue recommending it. It's great. Okay, next we have a nonfiction book, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. 4 stars. This is a nonfiction book that is literally covering the entire history of humankind from Homo sapiens evolving to hunter-gatherer societies all the way through to modern day. And also looking beyond that to the future of our species. So obviously this is a very broad overview given that it covers hundreds of thousands of years and the major societies that dominated different eras of history, but it also brings up a lot of really interesting philosophical questions while kind of doing that broad historical overview. So it never felt like just too dense or just like a list of facts like a history book. It tackles interesting questions on like why we as humans developed concepts like sexism, racism, colonization. And one thing that just really stuck with me that like I had never really grasped before is like how the concept of money and credit, specifically in the last century, was such like a catalyst for the economic shift, more so than even just the technological advancements that we've had themselves. And is what we're doing with technology now going to be the downfall of our species? Excellent audiobook to treat like a podcast. It was so good. Definitely one of my favorite nonfiction books of the year. Next we have Kindred by Octavia Butler. I give this 4 stars. This is a historical fiction, kind of science fiction book about a woman in the 1970s accidentally time traveling back in time to the slavery era South and living alongside her ancestors. This is such an immersive and gripping book. Really heartbreaking and hard to read at times, but I couldn't put it down. And Octavia Butler was the first Black female science fiction writer. An absolute trailblazer, phenomenal writer, highly, highly recommend. Next we have The Handmaid's Tale, 4 stars. This is about a dystopian future in an intensely patriarchal society. It was certainly a choice to read this while I was pregnant. I don't know what compelled me to do that. That made this even more haunting. There's also a very popular show based on this, which I had watched. If you've seen the show, you know, why would I ever subject myself to reading this while I was pregnant? That being said, it's a great book. It's incredibly gripping. I feel like, especially today, it's very relevant. It was haunting. It gave me nightmares, but I am glad I read it. And maybe I didn't need to read it at that time, but glad I read it. Okay, next we have First Lie Wins, 4 stars. This is a thriller about a woman living undercover. And I feel like that's really all I can say without giving any spoilers. So I'll just leave it at that. This is such an easy read. It grabbed me right from the beginning and it never stalled. It's fun, it's engaging, it's fast paced, lots of twists and turns, and just overall a pretty fun read. As we move up on this list, there's gonna be a couple more thrillers. I never thought that I would be someone who was into like thrillers and suspense because I don't like horror, and I feel like I kind of bundled all of those together in my brain. But what I've learned this year is I love some good suspense, some thriller, some mystery. So if you have any book recommendations in that realm, definitely leave them in the comments because next year I want to read even more books like that. All right, next at 4.2 stars, we have Daisy Jones and the Six. This book is fiction, but it's told through interviews about a band in the 70s, 60s, I think kind of both. I listened to the audiobook for this one and it had such a big voice cast, which made it feel so real and authentic. I loved it. And this book is by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I love her writing style. The story felt full and real. Really my only complaint with this book is the main character, Daisy Jones, is kind of like the manic pixie dream girl trope. She did annoy me a little bit, but I really enjoyed this one and specifically highly recommend the audiobook. Next up, also at 4.2 stars, we have Healing Wounds, a Vietnam War combat nurse's 10-year fight to win women a place of honor in Washington. Long title, so I had to read it, but this was a great book. It's a nonfiction account of a woman who was a combat nurse during the Vietnam War. And this book was one of the primary sources that Kristen Hanna used in her book, The Women. So I really enjoyed, after reading that book, reading like the real side of it, the real experience. This book was very eye-opening and vulnerable about mental health, very honest, very real, and it's the first person account of this really amazing woman who went through so much and then had to fight for so much to even have any recognition. Okay, next we have another thriller. This is the reappearance of Rachel Price. I give this 4.2 stars. It's a mystery about a girl trying to put together the pieces of what happened to her mom, and in the process unraveling a whole bunch of family secrets. This is a book that really kept me guessing. Like I was never quite really sure where it was going. It really kept me on my toes. It dragged a little bit in the middle, but the way the pieces all came together at the end was very satisfying. This was also a book that I read with my family book club, and so it was really fun getting to talk with everyone about it, because it's one of those books that when you finish it, you gotta talk about it. All right, next we have Paris Hilton's memoir, Paris the Memoir, 4.5 stars. I found this book interesting from the beginning, but it really took a turn when she got to the part about her experience in the troubled teen industry, and it was heartbreaking. It was hard to read at times because what she went through was so awful, and she speaks about it in such detail. But I'm so glad that she's speaking up about this, and I think it's really important. I can't imagine going through what she went through in this book. The fact that this happens is so disgusting, and this book is honest and vulnerable. She really bares her soul, and she takes responsibility for a lot of her mistakes while also shining a light to what she was going through that led to those choices. It does jump around a little bit, but I didn't mind that, and I thought it made a lot of sense. She frames this book from the beginning through her ADHD, so it makes a lot of sense. Next, at 4.5 stars, we have The Mist. This is another novella by Stephen King. It's a short read. It's a good read. I read it right before Halloween, and the spooky vibes were spooky. I love the idea that this book brings in of like humanity itself can be scarier than the monsters that we could even imagine. And I really appreciated the ending and the framing of it. All right, Carrie Soto is back, 4.5 stars. This book is a sports book. It's about a tennis player who is a little unhinged, actually very unhinged, and her career with her dad as her coach. I'm not usually a big sports book person, but this was so good. It's funny because she's kind of an asshole, like the main character. She's kind of terrible, but the book is also in first person, so you get her like mental justification of why she's acting this way. It was heartwarming at times. It was fast paced. Ugh, and the end, I was like on the edge of my seat. This is like a must read. Our next book is The Silent Patient. I give this 4.5 stars. It is a psychological thriller about a therapist and his patient who killed her husband, or did she? That is the question. And it grabbed me right from the beginning. I flew through it. This book got me out of a reading slump. Oh my God. And when all the pieces were coming together, I could not put this book down. I was gonna say I forget where I was when I was reading this, but I just remembered I was on vacation and I was literally walking around holding my Kindle with Alice in the carrier, like bouncing her because I had to find out what was happening. There is a big twist, which a lot of people don't like, and it did feel a little bit unearned for me, but it did not by any means ruin the book for me. Ugh. It was so good. That's a book that I would love to be able to read again for the first time. Next we have 11/22/63. I give this 4.5 stars. This is another Stephen King book, but this one is massive. It's a historical fiction thriller about a man who's going back in time to try and stop the Kennedy assassination. This book is long with lots of detours, but I liked them all. And this was the first Stephen King book that I ever read, and I just felt like his writing was so unique. And it got me wanting to read more from him, which I did, even though I'm like not a horror girly. And this book is definitely not horror, but it is a thriller. Had me on the edge of my seat. Speaking of thrillers and on the edge of my seat, next book, also 4.5 stars, we have The Housemaid. This is a book about a woman who is hired as a housekeeper, and the job is weird, but she also doesn't have a lot of options because she herself has a checkered past. So we're finding out things about her, things about the family that she's working for, and the twist in this book had my jaw on the floor. There were parts of this book that made me scream, that made me cringe in the best way. It just had me hooked. And this book I read in one sitting. This is one of the books that I read for the 24-hour readathon video that I did with my friend Hannah, and it was good. This is a book to pick up when like getting on a flight or like listening to on a long car ride, because this is a book that you will not want to put down. Our next 4.5 star book, just above The Housemaid, we have The Storyteller. This is a World War II historical fiction, and it's about a woman in modern times who's unraveling the story of her grandmother who was a Holocaust survivor. And not only her grandma, but also like the people that she came across. The historical fiction parts of it, like the flashbacks of her grandmother's story, those were the best parts of the book. That was amazing, 5 stars, but there's also like in the present day setting, there's like a random love story that just kind of like detracted for me from what made this story amazing. I'm like, all right, wrap this up. But there was a twist at the end that had my jaw on the floor, and it is so well executed because while I didn't see it coming, looking back, all of the signs are there and it feels like it makes perfect sense. Okay, next is nonfiction. A Well-Trained Wife, My Escape from Christian Patriarchy. I give this 4.5 stars. This is an excellent memoir told by an incredibly resilient woman. Her name's Tia Levings, and she details just the absolutely harrowing things that she faced as a woman in an abusive marriage and how the structure of the entire like Christian fundamentalist community around her not only allowed these things to happen, but also created this framework that subjugates women and leads to these terrible consequences. I learned about this author actually from the Shiny Happy People documentary that came out earlier this year. She shared parts of her story in that documentary, and I saw that she had a book coming out, so I pre-ordered it, and it was phenomenal. She's an absolutely amazing writer, and her story needs to be heard. Next book is Firefly Lane. I loved this book, 4.5 stars. It's a beautiful story of female friendship, like over the course of a lifetime. And it's just girlhood in a book, and later womanhood. It's just a really, really good story with characters and themes that resonated with me. And like, there's nothing too dramatic or shocking. It's just a good book. All right, next up we have Funny Story. I give this 4.5 stars. It has all the typical Emily Henry cliches, but I think executed the best. I love the premise. It is such a cute romance, and it is spicy. So spicy. Okay, not so spicy. Just some spice, but the spice, perfection. I think if you're gonna pick up an Emily Henry book, I would definitely recommend this one over the other ones. It's so cute, so well done, and a very easy read. Okay, we are now getting into the top 10. My top 10 books of the year. Number 10, we have Maybe in Another Life by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I give this 4.5 stars. But honestly, now reflecting on it, it might even be higher for me. That's just what I rated it like when I finished reading it. But this is a book that has really stuck with me. So the book follows 2 parallel ways that the main character's life could have gone, veering off from one point. She goes home with the guy, she doesn't go home with the guy. And it alternates chapters between the 2 realities, and you get to see just how her life takes shape in these 2 different scenarios, and it is so beautiful. And it's a sentiment that I find myself thinking about a lot, how like small choices that we make can really shape our lives. I loved the romances in this book, and it also has one of my favorite like platonic non-romantic duos ever in fiction. The relationship between these 2 friends is just so well-rounded, and I flew through it. This is another Taylor Jenkins Reid book. I just love her writing. I've said that so many times. And this is a book I would die to read for the first time again. But oddly, when I went to rate this on Goodreads, this was like one of her lowest rated books ever. And I'm like so shook that so many people don't like this book because I loved it. I thought it was so good. So if you've read this one, let me know your thoughts in the comments, because I feel like I have not heard a lot of people that loved this book as much as I did. Number 9, we have The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna, 4.5 stars. This is a historical fiction book set in the 1970s, following the life of this girl and her family who moves to Alaska, her struggles with her family, her dad's mental health, and really like this core theme of survival and self-reliance in the Alaskan wilderness, and love and community and loneliness. The setting was so immersive and it made me want to go back to Alaska so badly. And there's a beautiful romance and there's so much that happens in this book now that I'm like rethinking about it because I read this book pretty early on in the year. Honestly, I don't know why I didn't give this one 5 stars. Now reflecting on it, this feels like a 5-star book for me. Okay, everything from here on out is a 5-star book. I have 8 books that I gave 5 stars from this whole year. So number 8, we have The Testaments. This is the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, following different characters' perspectives of 3 women trying to take down this regime, and they all intersect. I was so invested, so hooked, and absolutely like fascinated with this, you know, dystopian world building. And they really expanded on that in the sequel and how all of these characters are fighting to take down the system in different ways, and it is just excellent. Number 7, we have Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. I am not totally sure how to describe this book. It's about friends who design a video game together in college. It's kind of a coming of age book, but honestly, it's so much more. This book is beautiful and heartfelt and clever, like so cleverly written, but not pretentious. I loved it. I cried. I stayed up till 2 in the morning finishing it. I feel like I'm not really saying anything about this book other than that it was great, but just read it. It lives up to the hype for sure. 5 stars. Okay, my highest rated nonfiction book of the year, we have The Only Plane in the Sky, an oral history of 9/11. This is basically 15 hours of straight eyewitness accounts of 9/11. The audiobook has a 45-person voice cast, and the way it's structured, giving so many different points of view but tied together so succinctly, it gives such like a comprehensive view of the way this tragedy unfolded. The description of this book says it paints the most human and vivid portrait of the September 11 attacks yet, and that is so accurate. Okay, next book, The Women by Kristen Hanna. This book wrecked me. It is so gripping. It has so many layers to it. It's historical fiction about the women serving as nurses during the Vietnam War. I did not know much at all about the Vietnam War going into this, and geez, like that's why after this book, I picked up Healing Wounds and What It's Like to Go to War. I talked about those books earlier because this book just, this is a book I have not stopped thinking about. Okay, next book, we have The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. This is a book that is so hyped and somehow even exceeded that hype for me. This was the second book that I gave 5 stars to this year. It's historical fiction of a woman recounting her life story as a Hollywood star from the 1950s onward. It is an absolutely beautiful story. It has LGBTQ+ themes. This book is popular and deserves it. It had that like 5-star for me. It's so good. Highly recommend. Oh my God, we're in the top 3. Okay, top 3 books. We have Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. This is like an epic family saga about 4 generations of a Korean family living in Japan. It starts in the early 1900s and goes all the way through the 1980s. It's incredibly well written. The perspective switches throughout the book, and I felt so invested in all the characters, all the generations, and the cultural and historical context was really eye-opening. I sobbed, I gasped, I highlighted the crap out of this. Like, there are so many beautiful quotes about family and suffering and womanhood and motherhood and loss, and oh, I love this book. Just thinking about this book again. Oh, so good. All right, my second favorite book of the year, we have Under the Dome by Stephen King. This is a science fiction book about an invisible dome that pops up in a split second over this small town, cutting them off from the rest of the world. So like, how does the town react? What caused this? How can they dismantle it? Corruption is exposed, tragedy strikes over and over again, and I was dying to know what would come next. This is a super long book, but an absolute page turner. Such good tension in this book. Like, when I wasn't reading this book, I was thinking about it. And there's nothing better than a literal 1,000-page book that is a page turner, because like, it sucks you in, but also you get to live in that world for so long, spend a lot of time with the characters. This is just such an amazing book. Great characters, really interesting premise, great writing. The one thing I will say is it is a huge cast of characters and it jumps between perspectives. So for the first like 100 pages or so, I was kind of confused trying to remember who's who, but so worth it because you come to really know and understand these characters. And this is a book where you root for the heroes and you really hate the villains. So good. Okay. First place, my favorite book of the year, we have The Nightingale by Kristin Hannah. This is a historical fiction book that's set in World War II France. It follows two sisters navigating life through the course of the war and how to fight back and make choices that protect the vulnerable and the ones that they love. It's an amazing story. It's so gripping. The emotions are intense. Kristin Hannah, the author, really makes you like feel the despair that they're going through. This book was long, but I flew through it and then I could not stop thinking about the characters long after I finished it. Top of my list. I actually want to read this again. Even just talking about it now, I'm like, oh, I want to reread it. It's so good. 5 stars, obviously. #1 book that I read this year out of 65, and that is my ranking of everything that I read in 2024. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have read any of these books, let me know down in the comments which ones were your favorite, if you disagree with me on anything, and also your top book recommendations that I can add to my reading list for next year. I had so much fun making this video. I've really enjoyed sharing more of my reading journey this year. And if you guys want more videos surrounding that next year, definitely let me know, because my reading goal for 2025 is 52 books. I want to read an average of 1 book a week. And if you want to see updates on what I'm reading in real time, you can follow me on Goodreads. I'll link my account in the description. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. This is gonna be my last video of the year. So thank you so much for watching and supporting through the whole year. I really appreciate it. Happy New Year, and I'll see you in 2025. Bye.